Ah, fuck it. XQC watched it, I'll watch it. I actually really like the DB Cooper story. And I haven't seen this one yet. I love the idea that a YouTuber, like, actually solves one of these things. I'm assuming he doesn't, right? But maybe he does, I don't know.
In the afternoon of November the 24th, 1971, a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase walked into Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket to Seattle, Washington.
Different place, Hyper.
The man identified himself as Dan Cooper, and along with 36 other passengers and a crew of 6, he soon boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305. Once aboard, Cooper made himself comfortable in the middle of the last row of seats on the right side of the cabin. He ordered a drink and had a smoke, because this was the 70s. Once the flight was cleared for departure, Cooper turned around and handed an envelope to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. Inside the envelope was a note featuring a handwritten message stating he had a bomb. Schaffner reluctantly sat down beside him and glimpsed what appeared to be
Christ, this story's so fucking wild.
Inside his briefcase. Cooper's demands were quite simple. He wanted $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. He also demanded a fuel truck to stand ready to refuel the aircraft once they landed in Seattle. Should they fail to comply with his demands, he threatened to, quote, do the job. Once the flight was airborne, Schaffner went to inform the cockpit crew while another
This was in like the
attendant
60s, so 200K back then was nuts.
By using a telephone in the rear of the cabin, Mucklow acted as an intermediary between Cooper and the rest of the flight crew.
They're 70s, whatever, still a ton.
For the next hour and a half, Flight 305 maintained a holding pattern near Seattle, while local and federal authorities scrambled to procure the ransom as well as the 4 parachutes. 10,000 $20 bills were collected from a local bank, while the owner of a nearby skydiving school supplied the chutes. At 5:45 p.m., more than 2 hours past its scheduled arrival, Flight 305 finally touched down in Seattle. By this point, it was well after sunset, and the aircraft was brought to a remote section of the tarmac. Once the flight came to a stop, both the ransom and the parachutes were handed over to Mucklow, who then brought them back aboard. In exchange,
how many people
Cooper
were on board the
permitted 2
plane?
of the flight attendants, as well as all the passengers, to disembark, many of whom had not yet realized the flight had been hijacked.
36,
With the ransom
60?
paid and only 4 crew members remaining on board, Cooper told Mucklow to inform the captain that he wanted to fly to Mexico City. They were to fly with the landing gear down, the flaps at 15 degrees and below 10,000 feet. The lights in the cabin were to be switched off, and the aft stairway, which opens from the underbelly of the fuselage, was to remain extended. 2 of Cooper's demands could not be satisfied. First of all, the flight configuration he'd requested would not allow for a non-stop flight to Mexico City. As such, Cooper proposed a refueling stop in Phoenix, Yuma, or Sacramento before they all agreed on Reno, Nevada. Second of all, it was not possible.
It seems like they're on Cooper's side, like, yeah, you can take the money and
Cooper agreed
tell us
to
where to go.
retract the stairs on the condition that Mucklow remained by his side and taught him how to extend them once the plane was airborne. Parked for nearly 2 hours due to complications with refueling, Flight 305 was back in the air by 7:36 p.m. Less than 5 minutes after takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to head for the cockpit and that from this point onwards, he was not to be disturbed. The last time she saw
the bomb
Cooper,
turned out to be
he
fake,
was standing
though.
in the
Sorry, I
middle
don't mean
of
to
the
spoil
aisle,
things.
as if though he was preparing to jump. Mucklow joined the rest of the crew, locked the cockpit door behind her, and some 3 hours later, Flight 305 safely landed in Reno. Once the flight came to a stop, the crew carefully
I could be wrong, I
ventured
don't
into the
really
rear of
remember
the
that.
cabin, but there was no sign of Cooper nor the bomb. The aft stairway had been extended mid-flight and was slightly damaged upon landing. It seemed there was only one explanation for the hijacker's absence. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Cooper had strapped on a parachute, walked down the stairs, and leaped into the dark of night.
Thanks, resub beat on. I'm not sure, Bear.
As soon as it became clear that Cooper was no longer on board, dozens of FBI agents converged upon the aircraft, only to discover a disappointing amount of physical evidence. A black clip-on tie, 8 cigarette butts, and 2 of the 4 parachutes were all that Cooper left behind. Evidently, he'd brought the ransom and briefcase along with him. In interviews conducted on the night of the hijacking, Cooper was described by the crew and passengers as a white
Thanks,
male
Tier
with
1,
brown eyes
Malkin.
and dark hair. He
And the
appeared to be
resub
in his
Robin and the Prime
mid-40s and wore
Banana.
a dark trench coat, a dark suit, a white shirt, a black tie, and dark shoes. Soon after boarding, he'd also donned a pair of sunglasses. Based on this description, the FBI produced the first of several composite sketches. Before they could mount a search, however, the FBI had to figure out when Cooper abandoned ship. But that was easier said than done. None of the 4 crew members witnessed Cooper jumping from the plane, nor did the pilots of 2 fighter jets which escorted the flight between Seattle and Reno. It was not all too surprising given it was the middle of the night. Although the flight crew did report something odd, the last communication with the hijacker occurred at approximately 8:05 p.m. when the crew used the intercom to offer assistance, which Cooper declined. Within the next 10 minutes, the crew experienced what they described as an oscillation or vibration of the aircraft. At the time, the crew suspected it might have been produced by Cooper's jump, and a subsequent recreation of the hijacking supported that conclusion. Okay, so that took care of the when, but what about the where? While Cooper was very explicit about the flight's configuration and destination, he never specified any kind of route. In fact, Cooper grew so impatient with the slow refueling in Seattle that he dismissed the captain's request to file a flight plan and simply told him to, quote, get the show on the road. As such, the captain chose to fly along an airway known as Victor 23 without any input from Cooper. By using Victor 23 as a guide, authorities estimated the most probable location of the flight at the approximated time of the jump was about 40 kilometers north of Portland. And so, at the break of dawn, the FBI mounted an impressive search operation using helicopters, airplanes, and ground troops. The problem was, even if the estimated bailout point was accurate, Cooper's eventual landing or drop zone was far more difficult to pinpoint. The
Fuck, it's so cool! This guy's like an actual Galaxy Brain anime villain.
By a dense forest, so it was truly like finding a needle in a haystack. Apart from the difficult terrain, the search was further complicated by low temperatures and inclement weather, which persisted for days. Despite their best efforts, authorities never managed to find a single trace of Cooper, nor the items he brought along with him. Stream by must have become buried at Tina Bar within a year of the hijacking.
This is so fucking complicated.
Seems to be that Cooper or someone else deliberately buried the money. Did Cooper survive and bury the money himself? Did someone else bury the money after stumbling upon Cooper's remains?
If you're in the chat, DB Cooper, just let me know, man. This is crazy. I want to hear more about it.
It's managed to elude investigators for decades. Suffice it to say,
I didn't know any of this part.
Within a mystery. Since Ingram's discovery in 1980, both Tina Bar and the grounds around the Washougal River have been subjected to numerous searches.
I have not seen that, nobly.
But to date, there's been no sign of Cooper, nor the rest of the money.
You know, if Cooper was as smart as we think he is, he would have done all of this while having a full beard, and then when he jumped, he would have shaved the beard off. Just to add another layer of good ideas to it.
Cooper did not survive his daring escape. It would not make for a very thrilling conclusion to this story, but that's the thing about stories. They're usually far more exciting. Selected was non-steerable, meaning he would not have been able to steer his descent towards a specific landing spot, thus precluding any potential coordination with an accomplice
so many problems.
On the ground.
He also forgot to account for the dragons that hover over Portland, Oregon.
His actual competence level is up for debate.
And also, on that night, there was a javelin tossing competition.
2 pairs of parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve, to make the authorities believe that he intended to take a hostage. That is precisely what happened, as the FBI contemplated, but eventually decided against sabotaging the chutes as they did not want to risk the life of an innocent civilian. But in their haste to obtain them, they unintentionally provided Cooper with a non-functional dummy chute intended for training purposes. This mishap seems to have gone unnoticed by Cooper because that dummy chute was one of the 2 missing from the plane. Not only that, but Cooper chose the older and technically inferior parachute out of the 2 primary chutes provided.
Nice.
So in both cases, it seems like Cooper made the worst possible choice. But there are other ways to interpret this information. For instance, it's possible that Cooper used the dummy chute not as a reserve, but as a means to secure the bag of money. In fact, that is precisely what Cooper tried to do with the functional reserve chute. First, he tried to place the money in the chute's canopy before removing some of the suspension lines and wrap them around the bag. Perhaps he used the dummy chute for a similar purpose. And Cooper's decision to use the older primary chute is not necessarily an indication of inexperience. It could also be a sign of familiarity, because the chute he left behind was a civilian luxury chute, while the one he used was a military chute. The argument is that Cooper might have been trained as, say, a paratrooper, and chose the older military chute because that's the one with which he was most familiar.
I'm starting to doubt it. I don't think so.
Suspect that Cooper had a military
You could have given him a giant pair of pants and he probably would have jumped off holding them.
Cooper mentioned that the
I think he's dumb as fuck now.
Was only 20 minutes away from the Seattle-Tacoma airport. At the time, that was an accurate assessment and might suggest a military background. Apart from the potential military connections, Cooper may even have had links to the Central Intelligence Agency.
I doubt it.
You see, the type of aircraft which
he was probably like a Redditor before Reddit existed.
727 was also used by the CIA to covertly drop agents and supplies during the Vietnam War. A task for which the Boeing 727 was uniquely qualified due to its distinctive aft stairway. So it's fairly safe to assume that Cooper chose to hijack a Boeing 727 specifically because it provided a relatively safe means of escape. Whether he learned of this from the CIA or came to that conclusion independently is another question.
Sugar Daddy.
However, the fact that Cooper chose to hijack a flight operated by Northwest Airlines was apparently random chance. When Tina Mucklow asked Cooper about his motives, he responded, "It's not because I have a grudge towards your airline, it's just because I have a grudge."
Oh, that's kind of fucking cool!
That Flight 305 just happened to be in the right place at the
You're not trapped in here with me.
Even so,
I'm trapped in here with frigid weather temperatures and a bad plan.
He seemed to know a great deal about aircraft and aviation. He appeared to be familiar with the local terrain. He maintained a low profile to avoid a panic. He covered his eyes with a pair of glasses to conceal his identity. He left very little evidence behind, and he demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption that he was taking a hostage. He was even cunning enough to reclaim the note which he'd initially given to Florence Schaffner. Apart from the name he wrote on his plane ticket, there are no other samples of Cooper's handwriting. But for all his planning and cunning, it seems Cooper did not give enough thought to his eventual escape. Not
Yeah, the
only
most
did he
important
fail to
part.
specify a route, but he was forced to
I
make
did
a
it.
last-minute destination
Now I'll just
change
kill
from
myself
Mexico
out here, I
City
guess.
to Reno. He could have demanded more appropriate parachuting equipment like a pair of boots, a helmet, or jumpsuit. He could even have specified the ransom to be delivered in larger denominations to make it lighter and less cumbersome to carry.
Exit Tier 1,
Assuming
Joe.
he did survive the fall and made it safely to the ground, he may then have had to make his way through a dense, partially snow-covered forest in nothing but loafers and a trench coat in late November. I get the distinct impression that Cooper's escape was much more of a leap of faith than a carefully executed jump. On the other hand, authorities never received a
I love
missing
the
persons
animation
report
he
in
has here
action
with
to
it too. He
description
looks
of
like he's really
Cooper
fucking
in the
struggling
wake of the
falling out.
hijacking. This might suggest that Cooper did survive and that he swiftly and quietly resumed his normal routine. Furthermore, other hijackers have performed similar stunts, and many of them did survive even if they were quickly apprehended. Finally, the simplest explanation for how 3 bundles of cash ended up at Tina Bar is human intervention. At the end of the day, most of this is based on nothing but supposition. Without any concrete evidence of Cooper's demise, it leaves the door wide open to the far more exciting proposition that he did, in fact, survive.
Nah, I've now been convinced that he's a fucking idiot. There's no chance. This man dove off in the middle of the night in the worst possible conditions. He should have. It's like he jumped into a volcano.
Among them was
he would have had a
man
higher chance of surviving
with
that.
Initials DB and surname Cooper. This Cooper was quickly eliminated as a suspect, but due to a mix-up by the press, the name Dan Cooper was confused for DB Cooper, and the rest is history. While Dan Cooper is most likely a pseudonym, there is a comic book series of the same name. The comic is written in French and centers around a Canadian pilot named Dan Cooper. While the comic was not translated into English nor sold in the United States before 1971, it was available in Canada, which has a large French-speaking population. Given that American and Canadian accents can be difficult to distinguish, it's possible that Cooper, who was described as having no discernible accent, was a bilingual Canadian. This might even be supported by something that Cooper might have said. You see, when the captain relayed Cooper's demands to air traffic control, he used the phrase negotiable American currency. It seems doubtful that an American citizen would specify American currency, so perhaps Cooper was not American. The problem is, we don't know if this is a direct quote from Cooper or paraphrasing by the captain. For instance, notes taken by the crew during the hijacking merely contain the phrase negotiable currency, while testimonies provided by the crew after the hijacking include phrases like $200,000 in cash and circulated US currency. So, Cooper might have been Canadian. And
I think Cooper might have been an alien.
Dan Cooper
At this point, it could be anything, anyone. We could all be DB Cooper.
Might have taken his name from something or someone else. Nearly half a century has gone by since the hijacking took place, and in that time, thousands of suspects have been questioned and investigated. It would obviously be impossible to cover all of them here, but let's take a look at some of the people that at some point or another have been suspected of being DB Cooper.
It's just a picture of my dad. This man loves working on old cars.
First became a suspect.
He's never parachuted, but we thought it was worth checking out anyway.
He seems like a solid candidate. He was a decorated Army paratrooper and helicopter pilot. He had experience with explosives. He had an extensive criminal record. He had an uncle named John Cooper who was an avid skydiver.
Whoa.
He was expelled from the army only months before the hijacking, which might suggest a motive. After all, the hijacker did say he had a grudge. When confronted by journalists and private investigators, Rackstraw would neither confirm nor outright deny that he was DB Cooper.
It's him then.
He'd say things like, "I could have been," or "I would not discount myself."
Thanks for the
On the other hand, Rackstraw had light-colored eyes, which Cooper
thanks
did
Cooper
not.
again.
More significantly, Rackstraw was only 28 years of age at the time of the hijacking. This is well outside the range of ages reported by the crew and passengers, most of whom believed Cooper was in his mid-40s. Kenneth Christensen first became a suspect in 2003 when his brother noticed certain parallels between him and Cooper. Christensen had briefly served as a paratrooper in World War II, and since 1953 he'd worked for Northwest Airlines as both a mechanic and a flight attendant. He was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking. He was left-handed, which Cooper might have been. For instance, Cooper used his left hand to interact with his briefcase, and the clip-on tie he left on board was affixed with a tie clasp applied from the left. Shortly before he died in 1994, Christensen had supposedly told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." After his passing, his family discovered over $200,000 in his bank accounts. To top it all off, Florence Schaffner stated that photographs of Christensen bore a strong resemblance to Cooper.
Why don't you check the serial numbers on that money?
Did not match the physical description of Cooper. He was both shorter and lighter. While Schaffner did see a strong resemblance, she remarked that Cooper had more hair, and that is supported by the composite sketches. And there was nothing suspicious about the large sums of money which he simply earned by selling land.
This is the 70s, it wasn't digital, I'm sure he had it physical.
In 1972, when he hijacked a Boeing 727 and escaped via the aft stairway, much like D.B. Cooper. Because of the significant overlap between the two hijackings, some believe they must have been committed by the same person. McCoy used a fake name, he used a fake hand grenade to threaten the crew, he used handwritten notes to issue his demands. Both McCoy and Cooper used the phrase "no funny stuff" as a warning to the crew. McCoy demanded $500,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. McCoy also bailed out the back of the plane once they passed over his hometown in the state of Utah. Apart from the similar modus operandi, McCoy had also served in the Vietnam War as a demolitions expert and a helicopter pilot. McCoy did actually survive the fall and managed to evade authorities for 2 full days before he was apprehended and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Before his death in 1974, McCoy refused to confirm or deny that he was D.B. Cooper. On the other hand, McCoy was an avid recreational skydiver and even came prepared with a skydiving helmet and jumpsuit. He gave very specific instructions about the flight path. In addition to the fake hand grenade, McCoy also used an unloaded handgun to threaten the crew. He failed to retrieve one of the notes he'd given to a flight attendant. He was only 29 years of age at the time of the hijacking, and all 3 flight attendants were quite certain that McCoy was not Cooper. While there are meaningful parallels between these two cases,
a lot of
McCoy
parallels.
might simply have been a copycat who'd read about D.B. Cooper in the news.
That is a lot of fucking parallels, though. Holy shit.
Dwayne Weber first became a suspect in 1995 when, shortly before his death, he supposedly told his wife, "I've got a secret to tell you. I am Dan Cooper." Following his deathbed confession, Weber's widow recalled a number of fascinating details. She claims to have found a backpack resembling the one used in the hijacking. She claims Weber had sustained a knee injury after jumping out of a plane. Weber supposedly had a nightmare about leaving his fingerprints on the aft stairs. And a year before the money was discovered at Tina Bar, Weber had allegedly paid a quick visit to the same location. In addition, Weber was a World War II veteran, he had an extensive criminal record, he'd matched the physical description, and he was 47 years old in 1971. On the other hand, Weber's fingerprints did not match any of the prints collected from Flight 305. Although, to be fair, there's no way to know if any of those prints actually belonged to Cooper. Furthermore, Weber's DNA did not match a DNA sample collected from the tie clasp. But once again, there's no way to know if the DNA on the tie clasp actually came from the hijacker and not someone else. What's so frustrating is that the FBI likely had a much better source of DNA at one point. If you recall, 8 cigarette butts were collected from the scene, and there's a good chance they were all suffused with Cooper's DNA. The problem is, that evidence was lost at some point, and has not turned up since.
How? What do you do, shove him up his butthole before jumping off? How did...
William Smith first became a suspect in 2018. Smith served in the Navy.
I totally forgot about that.
And likely had some experience with parachuting. He was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking. He had dark brown eyes. He matched the physical description. He shared a certain likeness with the composite sketches, especially this speculative sketch of an older D.B. Cooper. A student named...
That's definitely a drawing from his grandson or something.
Attended the same high school.
That is just that man.
Smith worked as a
drawn by his son.
For a railroad company for most of his life, but in 1970 the company filed for bankruptcy. As a consequence, Smith lost his pension, which might suggest a motive. He could, for instance, have developed a grudge towards the airline industry for their role in bringing about the downfall of the rail transportation industry. It's further speculated that Smith could have used his knowledge of railroad networks to hop on a train and escape undetected. On the other hand, Smith spent his entire life in the northeastern United States, given that the hijacking occurred on the other side of the country and was committed by someone who at least appeared to be familiar with the local terrain. Yeah. Smith is not the most ideal candidate. However, the fact that Smith worked as a yardmaster is interesting. You see, the tie that Cooper left behind was recently examined using an electron microscope, which uncovered various metallic particles. Some of these particles, especially pure titanium, were quite rare in 1971. This might suggest that Cooper worked as a manager at some sort of chemical or metallurgical facility, or possibly a rail yard.
I think it's him! The old man!
If nothing else, I hope this limited selection of suspects
professional opinion, I think there's no fucking chance after hearing all of the conditions he would have had to go through to survive that he actually survived. I think what could have fucking happened is he jumped out of the plane and just got split in half and gored by just awful temperatures. He probably went through like a fucking swarm of locusts too with everything he was saying was going on at the time. I think there's no chance that man fucking tapped down on the ground. He fucking died mid-flight. I had no idea the conditions were that bad when he made the jump. I didn't know half of this shit, actually. I only knew the general overview. Exit Prime Blammo. What a great watch. I can't believe I haven't seen that one. I know what Chubby Emu is. Fuck! Is there any new DB Cooper info now? Now I'm so glued. We have so much technology now, we should be able to recreate the entire history of that tie that DB Cooper left behind. We should be able to take that tie, put it in my fucking hard drive, and be able to see the entire manufacturing process and who owned the tie all the way up until it was on the plane. Here's the Prime Nar and the Tier 1 Swebs. I don't even know what that means, James. I'm not caught up on the drama on that one. Let's see. DB Cooper. RP is DB Cooper. Yeah, that'll be my new character in GTA RP. What is the newest development here? This video was in 2020, so do we have any startling new intel in 2021? Shit. Shit. Doesn't look like it. What a fascinating story. Is there any others like that? DB Cooper, flight attendant Tina Mucklow as the key to mysterious skyjacking, but does her story hold the answers? Cicada 3011's not terrible. And it's not 3011, is it? 3301? Yeah, it's 3301. He's the Tier 1 Ricky McKnight. Is this about the declassified UFO footage that the government released last year?
In early 2007, this silent black and white video was uploaded by a user on a conspiracy and UFO-centric forum called Above Top Secret. The user claimed the video depicted a disc-shaped UFO outmaneuvering a fighter jet somewhere off the coast of Mexico in the mid-2000s. They had supposedly gained access to the video while serving on board a US aircraft carrier and claimed to have smuggled the potentially classified material.
Hold on real quick, I want to send this to my dad. My dad loves UFO shit. Give me 1 second to send it to him. Okay, there we go. Thanks for the resub, Matt.
Off the ship. While some members of the forum chose to believe their story, others were not so easily convinced. For instance, the video was hosted on a website belonging to a group of German film students, which led some to denounce the clip as an attempted hoax. Even those who believed it could be genuine still complained that it was a totally uninspiring video of a fuzzy dot.
Thanks for the resub, David.
Over a decade later, this long-forgotten video suddenly resurfaced as part of an article by the New York Times. The video was now linked to a secret government-funded program and was even corroborated by a credible eyewitness. What had initially been dismissed as a hoax turned out to be real. The video was said to depict a genuine encounter between US Navy fighter jets and some sort of unidentified craft.
I just wish the video was better, because the video itself is pretty underwhelming.
A video of a similar yet completely separate incident was also featured at the beginning of the article, except this one had sound.
Dude, this is wrong, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude.
These two videos, along with a third released a few months later, spread across the internet like wildfire. Comment sections and discussion threads were dominated by unrestrained speculation about aliens and paranormal phenomena. The skeptics, meanwhile, took it upon themselves to analyze every pixel in every frame in the hopes of uncovering some...
It does look fucking weird.
...could identify these fuzzy blobs.
It's like a Beyblade.
Any lingering doubts about the video's authenticity vanished with the release of an official statement by the Department of Defense confirming that the videos depicted real events involving unidentified aerial phenomena. So, what exactly are we looking at?
Let's read some Chillo-Wisp. I'm super sorry to hear that taken. Well, I'm wishing her and your family the best, man. Good luck.
The first video was recorded off the northwestern coast of Mexico in late 2004. The story behind it has been recounted by more than a dozen naval officers, and it goes like this.
150 knots crosswind can make a plane go backwards.
A naval strike group led by the aircraft carrier the USS Nimitz was conducting pre-deployment exercises about 100 kilometers southwest of San Diego. Starting around the 10th of November, radar technicians aboard a guided missile cruiser, the USS Princeton, were puzzled by a series of unidentified radar tracks near San Clemente Island.
Thanks for the resub, official.
The tracks did not resemble any known aircraft and would sporadically appear in groups of 5 to 10 at a time. Suspecting a malfunction of some sort, the recently upgraded Spy-1 radar system was taken offline and recalibrated. Once the system was brought back online, however, the tracks had only become sharper. Among those on board were Senior Chief Operations Specialist Kevin Day, who was an expert on the Spy-1 radar system and had 18 years worth of experience.
Every ship should have like an alien conspiracy theorist on it.
Day observed firsthand how these unknown targets alternated between slightly strange and physics-defying maneuvers. Sometimes a cluster of tracks would appear out of nowhere and slowly drift south. They were flying too high to be birds, too slow to be conventional aircraft, and did not follow any commercial airways. Other times, they would seemingly descend from space and drop all the way down to sea level in mere seconds.
Wow!
These phenomena continued for several days, and every time they reappeared, the crew would run up to the bridge and use a pair of heavily magnified binoculars to see these tiny
like a bird
moving erratically.
Yeah, like a bird.
On the morning of November the 14th, the crew on board the USS Nimitz were gearing up for a scheduled air defense exercise. They had not yet been informed of the unusual returns picked up by the Princeton. It was a cloudless day, and the sea was calm as pilots took to the skies.
Thanks to Prime Midnight.
One of them was Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Kurth, who was flying a single-seat FA-18 fighter jet when he was contacted by the Princeton.
Thanks to Prime
He was instructed to investigate an unknown target approaching from the south. The Princeton also wanted to know if he carried any weapons, to which the answer was no. Kurth made his way to the specified coordinates but did not pick up anything on sensors. As he looked down towards the ocean, however, his attention was immediately drawn towards a turbulent patch of water. Kurth claims to have seen a roundish disturbance on the ocean, which appeared as though something was submerged just below the surface. It reminded him of a submarine or ship slowly sinking into the ocean. The Nimitz strike group did include a nuclear-powered submarine named the USS Louisville. The Louisville was in the vicinity when Kurth made his observations, so the churning may indeed have been caused by a submerging submarine.
That
if not,
makes sense.
Then whatever was in the water.
But what if it was a
kaiju?
kaiju?
By the Louisville's extremely sensitive sonar. Kurth was soon joined by a squadron of 2 tandem-seated F-18s, the lead aircraft of which was piloted by Commander David Fravor. Much like Kurth, Fravor claims to have seen a disturbance on the ocean, which he described as having a vaguely cross-like shape. He thought it resembled a downed airliner.
It was Jesus Christ in his space vessel.
Larger than a submarine. While Kurth eventually circled back for the Nimitz, Fravor and his wingman decided.
Then all of a sudden they looked on their lap, and there was a piece of toast
their descent,
with a beard
a white
and long hair,
capsule-shaped craft moving erratically above the disturbance. At first, they thought it could be a helicopter, but there were no rotor blades. In fact, it was perfectly smooth. No markings, no exhaust, no protrusions of any kind. The UFO appeared to maintain a consistent altitude, but made rapid lateral movements with no visible means of propulsion. According to Fravor, it was a bit smaller than an F-18 and resembled a giant mint of Tic Tac.
What?
As Fravor continued to descend, his wingman
They're flying around in birth control pills in space?
Flying in a spiraling downward motion, Fravor was getting closer and closer until suddenly the UFO realigned its axis and began to climb at an incredible rate of speed. Both of them were now flying in a circle. The UFO was coming up while the F-18 was going down. In an effort to close the distance between them, Fravor made a final aggressive turn before the UFO rapidly accelerated up to hypersonic speed and disappeared in a matter of seconds.
Why don't planes have a fucking video camera on them?
Perfectly calm.
It'd be so much easier to verify these things if the fucking pilot just had a goddamn iPhone attached to it somewhere.
And his wingman made it back to the Nimitz. They landed and ran into a different flight crew preparing to head back out. They told them what they had seen.
Then why wasn't it turned on?
Anything out of the ordinary. Soon thereafter, another tandem-seated F-18
Thanks to Prime random stuff in the resub Owen and
this
Dime.
Time, it was outfitted with an advanced targeting forward-looking infrared camera system. This ATFLIR pod is controlled by the weapons systems operator seated behind the pilot, and the backseater of this flight was Lieutenant Chad Underwood. A few minutes after departing the Nimitz, Underwood detected something on his radar. The unknown target
Hold on, I need some water. I love this shit though. I've always had a big fascination with UFOs and aliens and all that. I'll be right back. And thanks to the Prime Big Nut. Oh, shit. Thanks to the Prime
In
Lucid.
complete isolation, utterly divorced from any and all surrounding context, this video is extraordinarily unremarkable.
Agreed.
It's a fuzzy blob against a featureless background. It's only when you place it in the middle of these truly remarkable stories that the video itself becomes remarkable. When skeptics and debunkers higher resolution video than the one we see today. They claim to have seen this video on board the Princeton and that the shape of the UFO was perfectly clear as it violently maneuvered around the screen. What's interesting about this claim is that when the video was first leaked online back in 2007, the anonymous leaker claimed they had 4 different versions of the video in their possession. 2 of them were said to be shorter, but the 4th was said to be twice as long and supposedly showed more UFO movement. Unfortunately, this extended version has never seen the light of day.
Until
And if some
now.
of the witnesses are to be
I'll
believed,
release it if we
likely
get
never
200k
will.
viewers
You see,
right
on the
now.
evening of November the 14th, all the footage and data from these events were supposedly erased. Witnesses claimed that 2 men arrived via helicopter who then collected the relevant data before having all the tapes and hard drives wiped clean. Witnesses from both the Nimitz and Princeton
Do you think if there
recall
was
such a visit
alien
and
visits,
insist that nothing like it had
it
ever
really
happened
wouldn't
before?
leak?
This has
I
understandably
genuinely
led to
find that hard to
speculations
believe.
of
I
some
feel
sort
like
of
it'd have to
cover-up,
leak.
that these sightings were that of top-secret military drones or aircraft. While the US military is undoubtedly experimenting with all kinds of cutting-edge technology, it is difficult to believe they possess gravity-defying, hypersonic flying tic-tacs. If so, they would possess technology so far beyond anything known to the public, it would be akin to magic. And this was back in 2004.
It has leaked,
Don't
we
get
just
me
don't
wrong,
believe it.
2004 was a
No,
magical time
I
compared
don't.
to
I don't think that's.
but it was
that's
still
it.
aggressively 2004.
Flat ball! From a disc to a ball right before your eyes. Catch it, flatten it, and let it fly! Flat ball!
Flat ball
I really
was
don't
pretty
know
cool.
what to make of this story. After reading, watching, and listening to so many interviews with the people who were there, I'm left with a distinct impression that they're telling the truth. The video, on the other hand, does little to support their claims. Sure, this fuzzy blob
get
may
so
be
crusty.
unidentified, but it's not unexplainable.
Do people really think if aliens exist, they can travel at light speed? They don't have the technology to
The
not be
second
seen?
and third videos were recorded off
I
the
have no
southeastern
fucking
coast
idea.
of the United States in early 2015.
Not exactly
While
the
those
same
who
thing.
recorded the footage
Invisibility
have
and
yet to come
speed don't
forward,
go hand in
some
hand.
of their crewmates and fellow pilots have, and according to them, the story goes like this. In the summer of 2014, a naval strike group led by the aircraft carrier the USS Theodore Roosevelt was conducting pre-deployment exercises somewhere off the coast of Virginia. Much like with the Nimitz encounters, the first sign of trouble came in the form of anomalous radar tracks. Following a fleet-wide upgrade of aircraft radar systems, pilots had begun to pick up unidentified targets while conducting routine training missions.
Doesn't the universe expand faster than the speed of light? I see a lot of people again spamming that it's impossible to travel faster, which, I mean, obviously current understanding would say so, yeah. But doesn't the universe expand faster than the speed of light, or does it expand at the speed of light? Let's see. Oops. Okay. Not super helpful. Let's ask this a little better. Okay, so the universe expands faster than the speed of light, but nothing in it does. So what the fuck? How does... It's such a baffling concept. Very interesting. So how the fuck can the universe go faster than the speed of light with its expansion, but the things that are left in it aren't traveling at that speed? Yeah, if only Yahoo Answers could solve this for me. Crazy. Exit Tier 1,
the tracks
Amelia.
were initially dismissed as false positives, but their behavior was unlike anything they had seen before.
True, Rope.
Gravity-defying maneuvers, hypersonic velocities, and other mystifying shenanigans. Attempts to intercept these UFOs were initially unsuccessful. Lieutenant Danny Acoin claims that on 2 separate occasions he tried but failed to make visual contact. Then, one day, a squadron is said to have narrowly avoided a mid-air collision with one of these UFOs. The 2 jets had been flying in tandem no more than a few tens of meters apart when something flew right in between them.
What was that, the box
something
ghost?
Was oddly described as a cube encased by a translucent sphere.
What?
Lieutenant Ryan Graves, who spoke to one of the pilots once they had landed, claims the experience had visibly spooked them. So much so, the squadron filed an official safety report. According to Graves, this was far from an isolated incident. These UFOs were allegedly seen by dozens of pilots for several months and could remain airborne for up to 12 hours at a time. Yet, despite growing concerns among the Roosevelt crew, training missions continued as if nothing was amiss. By early 2015, the Roosevelt strike group had made its way down to the coast of Florida, which is when the 2 now famous videos were recorded, both of which are said to be short clips taken from much longer and higher resolution footage. We don't know much about the circumstances as the officers involved.
So this happened near Florida?
But
are we sure it wasn't just like a meth addict who made a homemade plane and all of the jerky movements are him crashing?
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing! It's rotating.
So, there are a few things to unpack in this one. If we ignore the audio for a moment and focus solely on the visuals, the thing that immediately stands out is the apparent rotation of the UFO.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
I use the word apparent because some debunkers claim that this rotation is an optical illusion.
Fuck.
You see, the Atflair pod is equipped with something known as a derotation mechanism. It's meant to counteract the rotation of the camera so that the orientation of the image stays the same, also known as image stabilization. What may not be stabilized, however, are certain artifacts produced by the lens of the camera. You can even try this yourself. Aim a camera towards a light source, rotate the camera, stabilize the footage, and there you go. The orientation of the image is preserved while these spokes of light rotate along with the camera. So much like how the light from this light bulb is producing a lens flare, the infrared radiation from this UFO is said to be producing a lens glare. In other words, debunkers claim it is the camera and thereby the glare which is rotating, not the UFO itself. While this explanation
you
seems
ruined Christmas then. Fuck you. I thought that was cool.
Things get a bit more confusing once we bring back the audio.
Well, if there's a thing, it's rotating.
If this rotation is merely the result of image stabilization, why would the two pilots fail to recognize it as such? Surely they, if anyone, would know what that looks like. And they're not alone. Both Lieutenant Graves and Acoin believe it is the UFO which is rotating. Furthermore, an expert on the ATFLIR system has very plainly stated that this is not an optical illusion. But this is not the only puzzling comment made by the two pilots.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
So the radar is supposedly detecting a whole fleet of UFOs, which are all traveling crosswind. I mean, if what we're looking at is something prosaic, like the blooming exhaust of a jet engine, these comments don't make a whole lot of sense. I would love to hear what these two pilots have to say if they ever decide to come forward. Until then, all we can do is speculate.
Thanks for the 5 gift subs again, Syaxis. Appreciate the generosity.
Nickel 6-1 Tango Roger. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger. There's troubleshooting. Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly!
That's definitely a kid who just got his superpowers. That's like the first thing anyone that can fly would do.
Interesting of the three. Once again, let's ignore the audio for a moment and focus solely on the visuals. Unlike the previous two, the UFO in this one is colder than its surroundings, so the ocean below is radiating more heat than whatever this is. It may look as though the UFO is traveling at high speed, but this is likely the result of parallax. In short, aircraft go fast, camera fixed on not so fast UFO appear to go fast.
Interesting, Naruto.
Some say the UFO is near sea level and therefore the parallax explanation doesn't work, but we can actually derive its altitude using the numbers on screen and find that that is not true. Everything seen in this video is consistent with a balloon or some sort of debris floating in the wind. The commentary by the pilots, however, does once again introduce a bit of confusion. I mean, it seems odd for the pilots to be so excited over something so mundane, but without hearing from the pilots themselves...
Maybe the pilots are just fucking dumb. Like, you know, it's totally possible. We can fly a plane, but we're also kind of fucking dumb. We don't know what it looks like when a grocery bag gets picked up by a strong wind. You know, I can't rule it out.
The person responsible for making these videos available to the public is a man named Lou Elizondo. Beginning in 2008, Elizondo was the head of a secret government-funded effort to investigate UFO sightings known as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. By late 2017, however, Elizondo had grown so disillusioned with the government's lack of interest in the program's efforts that he decided to resign. In his resignation letter, Elizondo writes that certain individuals within the government are staunchly opposed to UFO research, that inflexible mindsets and political contention essentially prevented him from doing his job. He portrays the government as virtually unconcerned about an issue which he believes could pose a threat to national security, so much so that he felt it necessary to resign in protest. This seemingly uncaring attitude was also noted by witnesses of both the Nimitz and Roosevelt encounters.
Once we were in the road and saw a diaper flying in the air, must have been that and just didn't stop flying.
Completely unfazed
by
this video.
That's probably what it was.
On the day when it was captured, he supposedly looked at it for 5 seconds, then walked away without saying a word. Some of the senior officers on board the Nimitz and Princeton are said to have had an equally muted response. These are very bizarre reactions to potential airspace incursions. You'd think they'd want to make sure these UFOs are not some kind of threat. The near mid-air collision reported by one of the squadrons from Roosevelt seems especially concerning.
Not really concerning, it was just, it had a mission.
Many point to the severe stigma surrounding the topic of UFOs. Regardless of how inaccurate it may be, the term UFO has, for many, become synonymous with aliens.
Goddamn right.
So much so, the government now favors the term UAP, specifically to avoid this unwanted association. Whether sightings go unreported or uninvestigated, the argument is that people choose to look the other way because they're concerned about their reputation. No one wants to be seen as a nutcase and potentially lose out on a promotion.
Makes the bits ash
Others believe there could be something a bit more conniving at play, that no serious action is taken because a highly advanced and top-secret drone program is responsible for the sightings. Even some of the witnesses have entertained that possibility. For instance, Sean Cahill, who was the chief master at arms on board the Princeton, perceived the inaction of senior staff as a clear sign that the UFOs were known military assets. But as previously mentioned, it is difficult to believe such radical innovation could have taken place in absolute secrecy. We're talking about such advanced technology,
I don't think so,
would barely make sense in a science fiction novel. Vehicles that can exceed the speed of sound without producing any sonic booms. Vehicles that can drop or climb to virtually any altitude in a matter of seconds. Vehicles that can violently change direction of travel as if inertia was a mere suggestion. None of that should be possible, yet dozens of trained observers claim they witnessed the impossible. The least uncomfortable solution, therefore, is to simply not believe them. Sure, the witnesses are credible, but they're not incontrovertible. Everything from optical illusions to faulty equipment could be used to cast doubt on their extraordinary tales.
Vessel in the Prime
and without
Legend.
any corroborating evidence, except for this nebulous footage, that is not a difficult task. As such, many government officials may not seem concerned because they genuinely believe there is nothing.
I have an alien story. I'll tell it in a second. Not the one I told last time.
Personally, I'm left feeling very conflicted. On the one hand, I find the witness accounts quite compelling. On the other, I find this grainy trilogy of dots in the sky somewhat underwhelming.
Agreed.
Sure, the videos are fascinating, but they're also far too ambiguous to provide any decisive answers. I highly recommend that you seek out and listen to some of the witness accounts so that you can
Favorite
judge
monster truck? I'm not sure. The one that did a front flip.
This is very much a developing situation. By the time you watch this video, chances are more information will have been released.
Nope.
According to Elizondo, the Nimitz and Roosevelt encounters are just the tip of the iceberg. Sightings by military personnel are said to be commonplace. It's just that we rarely hear about them. I can only hope that more evidence is released in the near future and that at least one video depicts something inexplicable. Something that is unidentified because it defies explanation, not because it's too distant, too small, or otherwise too obscure. No, but something truly extraordinary.
That's sweet, Buttercup.
What I want to see.
That was a cool video. So, like I said, my dad is super fucking into this alien shit, and I've told this story before, but a long time ago, my mom and dad were friends with a really high-ranking officer in the U.S. military, and the guy was fucking wild. So, I mean, the guy's real. Like, I even looked into him to make sure that, like, they didn't just get scammed or something. So the guy, I won't drop his name for obvious reasons, he was like a really high-ranking military guy. It's hard to, like, explain the story without, like, fucking giving away the guy's info. He was like the head of a very big air base, and when he retired, dude got kind of big into the alcohol, and he would give away like a lot of shit that he probably shouldn't to my parents, some of it like standard war shit, but then like my dad, being as curious as he was about aliens, would always bring up like UFO shit and alien shit, and I don't know if he was just fucking with my dad, but he would always like go down that path. He'd be like, He'd be like very serious and be talking about like how he has had encounters with UFOs and that the government tries to keep it under wraps and that he's seen actual wreckage and shit. So ever since that, my dad has been super fucking adamant that they are real and that the government keeps them under wraps. I think that the family friend was just fucking with him, but it is something interesting to think about. Thanks to the resub, famous ladies man in the prime braid. If he wants to talk about it, I'd fucking love to interview him about it. My dad has told me that shit constantly. Actually, I think he's dead. Is my dad still awake? Let me ask if the guy died. He retired because it was like he suffered some kind of injury or some shit. I'm texting my dad real quick. Yeah, I started Invincible. It's pretty good. Thanks to the resub, ambidextrous. Aliens got him. Nah, he suffered some kind of injury at one of the bases or some shit. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've heard the story, like the full story. Thanks to Tier 1 Viking and the resub Rubhub. And the resub Perpetual Retrograde Jackie and the Prime Play Stuff. Alright, cool. Hold on, he's still awake. I'm gonna call him real quick. I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Thanks to resub Godslayer. Yeah, the guy I was talking about passed away. Would have been really cool to fucking ask him about it, though. Thanks to the resub Phoenix.
We are going to do a psychic brain massage.
Well, fucking do it then, pussy. Oh my. Oh my. Oh my. I'm expecting any minute now for him to like chug a fifth of vodka and just say shoe nice or something.
Can you feel?
Oh.
Ooh. Feel me pulling.
Shit, he's powerful. God damn. Ooh, wait. Hey, whoa, be nice to the psyche.
We can connect.
Yes, please. Let's connect. That's what I want.
Oh. From your mind.
Oh, whoa.
In out.
Wow.
Your brain.
Oh, yes. Pet it, please. Wonderful. That felt great.
Had the misfortune to handle this incorrectly, you would most certainly have a painful and horrible death.
What?
Sadly, this subject has been covered before by someone I know.
Uranium.
But I found this story really interesting and I had to do a video about it.
Plutonium?
This
Fuck!
video.
Son of a
Like
bitch.
many of my atomic videos, our story starts during the Second World War
spicy.
and the Manhattan Project. The Demon Core, or Rufus as it was originally nicknamed, was intended to be used in a third atomic bomb to be dropped on Japan. It was designed to be 5% below critical mass.
So this doesn't seem
leaving
like
the
super
core
interesting though.
somewhat
Like
safe. However,
we know now how
5%
dangerous
was
plutonium
to
is.
ensure that when needed, it could be used to make a very large explosion easily.
Seems like a really comprehensive lesson into the dangers of plutonium, but yeah, I was expecting like some wild shit. But I mean, it's a good sport. I certainly have no problem with shin kicking. When do they... There it is. The danger to the sack is really high in this sport, but I'm pretty sure they wear a cup.
So the Harvard Globeheads debunked their model yesterday.
You're not testing on a ball, guys. The Earth is flat.
Oh shit! Wait, is this serious or no?
We're gonna put one magnet here in California. Seriously, I'm about to lose it. I'm getting pissed.
This is absolutely satire, isn't it?
Toilet paper and hit space.
God damn it.
I thought he was gonna die, dude. I literally thought he was gonna die.
Wow.
I thought you...
Holy shit.
They're a complete shock.
I thought it was an actual flat earther thing.
You can't write that stuff, guys. I'm just having my freaking world rocked.
Shut the fuck up!
It's everything.
This looks very high effort though, wow.
Right. And I've always been right. You guys get it? You guys fucking get it?
Damn, the amount of effort that seems to have gone into that is wild. It says parody? What, where? Oh, god damn it! Well, I mean, I think it was pretty clear. But, yeah, I should have just seen this right away and not got excited.
So the Harvard Globeheads.
FaZe Rug Gatorade in Windex bottle prank. Tell me if it's fake or not. Alright, I don't have to watch it. I can tell you it's fake. FaZe Rug is in the fucking title. What do you mean? I'll watch it for a couple seconds just to confirm, make sure I'm on the right track here. I don't want to be wrong. But I can tell you it's definitely fake.
What's going on, guys? FaZe Rug. I know her reaction is gonna be funny. It's gonna be so fun to do, and oh god, I'm actually scared to do this. And I'm gonna ask her if she needed help cleaning.
That's nice of you. Got something? Did you really fucking drink him now and that? Come on, you should look.
It looks. My mom got so scared.
You were on.
It's fake. That's probably enough FaZe Rug's content for the whole year, in fact. We just reached the limit. Watch the Glico-Morinaga Incident, Japan's greatest unsolved mystery.
Explore the Glico-Morinaga case and its perpetrator, the monster with 21.
That's a cool title, I'm in.
Izaki legacy, but nothing could have prepared him for the night of March 18th, 1984, or the subsequent nightmare that would last nearly a year and a half after that. At approximately, the two men first happened upon Mrs. Izaki and one of the couple's 3 children.
This is not what I was expecting
at all.
They were both
bound. Meanwhile, Katsuhisa, hearing the commotion, tried to remain unnoticed in the nearby bathroom with his 2 other children, but his efforts were ultimately in vain. Do but wait. A ransom request was made the very next morning, with the unidentified assailants asking for the equivalent of $4.3 million, along with 220 pounds of gold.
Damn!
A staggering amount for anyone, but one that would ultimately never have to be paid. Just 3 days later, Katsuhisa managed to escape completely unharmed, revealing to both police and the public that he'd been held in a warehouse in nearby Ibaraki City, not far from his own company's headquarters. Puzzlingly enough, the CEO also claimed that he managed to finally escape because he, for some reason, had been left unmonitored. Almost a month after the taking of Katsuhisa Izaki, more bizarre events began to unfold for Glico. On April 10th, a number of vehicles outside the company HQ were inexplicably set on fire in a suspected arson case.
What the fuck is going on with Glico?
A week later,
Jesus,
a container
they're
full of
haunted.
hydrochloric acid was located in one of Glico's buildings. Both Glico and local Osaka media received letters claiming that cyanide-laced packs of the company's candy would be placed on store shelves. The letters signed by a person or group choosing
Damn, this is like the actual Zodiac killer. Like,
21
he must have fled the States and then went here to
many
torment the
assumed
chocolate
was
guy.
Taken from the works of mystery writer
Glico and the
Rampo
Chocolate
Ogawa,
Factory.
specifically a character known as the Monster or Fiend with 20 faces. It goes without saying that what happened next here was mass panic, and of course for good reason. Now, despite all the damage, however, no poison candies were actually found. Meanwhile, investigators were scrambling to crack the case, but the so-called monster with 21 faces was slippery, and they knew it. As this was all going on, the letters did not stop. Many that were sent to the media were addressed directly to Japanese police, who the monster described as stupid and incompetent.
Oh, hey, that's hey, let's not be rude. What the fuck?
Frustrated with police,
they're doing their best.
The vehicle was gray and that they'd entered Glico's factory via the front gate in order to plant the container filled with acid, which they claimed was originally street garbage. The letters themselves.
Imagine being so incompetent at your job that the criminals you're trying to catch are just openly giving you hints to make it more fun for them, because you can't figure it out on your own.
Solid clues as to the monster's identity, aside from the fact that they seemed local based on the dialect that was used. There did, however, appear to be one possible break in the case after Glico's products had been recalled.
Oh!
This man was spotted on CCTV, seemingly placing something onto a store shelf.
We got him!
It is a bit difficult to make out, but the man here is wearing a business suit and glasses, along with a Tokyo Yomiuri Giants baseball cap.
Oh, I actually thought that was a New York Yankees cap for a second, I'm not gonna lie.
Footage associated with this case, but whoever is depicted in it, the so-called videotaped man, Japan, has never been identified or even formally connected to the person or group who calls themselves the Monster with 21 Faces. On June 26, at the height of all the chaos and confusion, something even more bizarre took place.
Oh god.
Another letter had turned up, but this time
it was a love letter.
That the monster was done with Glico. The note, addressed to the people of Japan, said the president of Glico has already gone around with his head hanging down long enough. We would like to forgive him. Japan has gotten terribly hot and humid, so when our work is done...
Yeah, maybe I'll check that one out next, Raiden.
Geneva, Paris, London. We'll be in one of those places. Let's bring Pocky, the traveler's friend. Delicious Glico products. We're eating them too. See you in January of next year. And it even came without any money being exchanged. This, of course, would seem
yeah, they haven't made a single fucking dime from this shit.
If not for the fact that the monster really hadn't stopped at all. In fact, it had already started targeting other brands, including one Marudai food company, with much the same tactics it had already used with Glico. Once again, ransom was demanded in exchange for peace, and unlike Glico, Marudai was ready to comply.
Oh no!
But with a catch. On June 28th, just 2 days after the
Why comply? They clearly just gave up last time.
With Glico, said man was described as having a larger build, short hair, glasses, and most notably, eyes said to resemble those of a fox. The undercover cop was instructed
so you sent a cop that was high.
A white flag, the signal to drop the money. But since that flag never appeared, the cop continued on the route until its eventual end in Kyoto. He was only there long enough to hop on the next available train back to Osaka, and sure enough, the fox-eyed man boarded the exact same train. This time, the monster wasn't bluffing. Several packs of Morinaga products were found with additional labels on them reading, "Danger contains poison," signed the Monster with 21 Faces. In response, a staggering 40,000 Japanese police officers were set to watch over
get rid of the surprise by saying that.
Stores. In August of 1985, things were still at a standstill, and the Japanese public were furious with law enforcement's perceived
Appreciate it, Giggle. Thank you. And
the
yeah,
pressure
GTRP
was
is always
too
fun.
much for one man in particular who had worked on the case. Superintendent Shoji Yamamoto, who, tragically out of shame, set himself on fire and would ultimately pass away.
What?
The monster, meanwhile, had been watching...
What? This is like literally an anime plot. The fucking detective was so ashamed he couldn't catch the guy that he lit himself on fucking fire? This is probably what he looked like when he was burning alive too, just so fucking stoic about it. Like, yeah, I'm burning alive, what is it? What of it? Huh, pussy? My god! What? Bro, like over here, the fucking lead detective on a case probably thinks about it 10 minutes out of his day. And meanwhile, this guy was so consumed by it and so disappointed he couldn't crack it, he lit himself on fucking fire.
We decided to give our condolences. We decided to forget about torturing food-making companies. If anyone blackmails any of the food-making companies, it's not us, but someone copying us. We are bad guys. That means we've got more to do other than bullying companies.
Kind of a lame note, not gonna lie, kind of lame.
But even so, people were still left with no answers, no real reason
for
why all this...
So, this is fucking crazy. So the guy lit himself on fire, and that was such a profound statement that the criminals just stopped. So this guy, like, he must have seen the strings that attached everything. He must have cracked the fucking code. By lighting himself on fire, he solved the case, but he lit himself on fire because he couldn't solve it. So the act of the self-immolation ultimately solved the case. This is crazy. And there, man, what a story. And the criminals also had so much honor that they respected him so much that they just quit.
It almost comes off like the Monster with 21 Faces didn't actually want to hurt anyone or even make money for that matter. Why place labels on tainted goods? Why not actually collect on the money? Why leave the CEO unmonitored, which allowed for his escape? That we don't know. In the end, we're never going to know what the monster really wanted. Was it to make a point to society or to play out his very own detective fantasy in real life? The answers remain unclear, but what's troubling to think about is that the monster with 21 faces could still be alive today, and much like the Fiend, the monster remains unseen.
That was great, but what an I can't help but feel like it's all wasted. So, like, the team behind the monster with 21 condoms, like, they did something crazy. Like, they did something nuts. And no one will ever know who it was. So that group, or that maybe one person, they can never fucking brag about it. They can never be like, I'm a genius. Like, this guy probably sits at the dinner table with his family or his friends. He's like, yeah, I'm fucking smart as shit. And then he can never prove it. Because he can't just be like, yeah, I'm the monster with 21 faces or whatever. Such a waste. You did something nuts and no one will ever know. Except you. You yourself are the only one that will know. Shame.
Just let me know.
No, I can't say I've seen that, James. I do not really like Disrupt. I've watched a lot of their stuff. I think they jump from topic to topic in the same video and it makes it convoluted and hard to follow. It's awfully pretentious. Their visuals are really cool, but I don't think they tell the stories very well. Thanks to Prime Ethan, the resub Juno.
In the late 19th century, the city of London was the largest in the world. A sprawling metropolis and a melting pot for trade, finance, and people. But in the autumn of 1888, an horrific story emerged from the capital's East End. A story so dreadful, it sent shockwaves around the world. One after another, destitute women of the East End fell victim to a vicious killer known as Jack the Ripper. Despite an extensive manhunt and a few close calls, the Ripper was never caught.
Jack the Ripper was in Shanghai Nights.
Came to an abrupt end.
That's how I learned about him.
Behind one of the greatest mysteries in the annals of crime.
Thanks to Tier 1 Delta, the resub Larzified and Toasty with bits, 6 pandas. I hope you feel better, Pillow Pete.
In the East End of London, there's a district known as Whitechapel. In the late 19th century, Whitechapel was known for its overcrowded slums, where many of the capital's poor and unemployed had taken refuge. Day and night, an army of policemen would constantly patrol this labyrinthine network of dim-lit streets, courts, and alleys. One such place was a narrow passage known as George Yard. Near the north entrance of this passage was a residential complex known as George Yard Buildings.
Not a very inspired name.
It was the morning of August the 7th, 1888, when an upstairs tenant named John Reeves headed out for work. Upon reaching the first floor landing, Reeves encountered the body of a woman lying upon her back in a pool of blood. Horrified by the sight, he stumbled down to the street below in search for help. Constable Thomas Barrett was the first officer on the scene.
Hey, Thomas.
He was soon joined by Dr. Timothy Killeen, who conducted a brief examination. The woman had been stabbed 39 times, primarily in the chest and abdomen. Dr. Killeen estimated that she had been dead for, quote, about 3 hours, thus placing the time of death at approximately 2:30 in the morning. The woman had likely been attacked where she was found, as no blood was found beyond the staircase landing.
But this was
strange, as none of the tenants in this crowded building had heard a single cry for help or a disturbance of any kind. One exception was Amy Hewitt, a tenant who claimed to have heard a lone cry of murder. But this was early in the evening of August the 6th, and the scream had emanated from outside the complex. Hewitt further explained, "The district round here is rather rough, and cries of murder are a frequent, if not nightly occurrence."
It sounds like a real shithole.
Identified as 39-year-old Martha Tabram. Tabram was a mother of 2 and had separated from her husband many years prior.
Amy Schumer.
Her address was 19 George Street, a common lodging house less than 300 meters from the site of her death. Tabram had made a living through prostitution, and one of her associates was a woman named Marianne Connolly. Connolly testified that on the evening of August the 6th, she and Tabram had been out drinking with 2 soldiers. Then, shortly before midnight,
Makes you
the
some
party of
hawk.
4 had separated. Connolly took her client into Angel Alley, while Tabram guided hers into neighboring George Yard. It was the last time she saw Tabram alive. Barely 2 hours later, Constable Barrett had spoken to a soldier loitering near the north entrance of George Yard.
Well, this is probably the
soldier
guy.
had told Barrett that he was, quote, waiting for his mate who had gone away with a girl. Half an hour later, Tabram is presumed to have died. Both Connolly and Barrett were called upon to identify the soldiers, but all those accused could provide an alibi. One had been at home with his wife, another at an army base, and yet another in a completely different part of the city. This was enough for Inspector Edmund Reed, the lead investigator on the case, to abandon this line of inquiry. Connolly and Barrett having both picked out the wrong men, they could not be trusted again, as their evidence would be worthless.
Rough.
Even if a soldier had been responsible, no one could deduce a motive. The people of Whitechapel might have been accustomed to crime and violence, but the sheer brutality of this
I remember
attack
when this was on the
as
news.
frightening as it was confounding.
What the fuck are you, a time traveler? What?
Crime
This
is
was in the
one of most
1800s.
brutal that have occurred for some years. For a poor, defenseless woman to be outraged and stabbed in such a manner is almost beyond belief. These were the concluding remarks delivered at the final inquest held on August the 23rd. Only a week later, things would go from bad to worse.
I remember Jack the Ripper was in the Fate anime. Wasn't who you expected it to be, I'll tell you that much. Leave it to anime to crack the case.
For work. As such, they quickly resumed their morning commute, hoping to notify policemen along the way.
Jesus Christ.
Fortunately, Constable John Neal was just around the corner. Neal was equipped with a lantern and found the woman lying on her back with a deep cut across
Chris,
the
there
throat.
is no new slapping, man.
The wound was still bleeding, and parts of her body were still warm. He was soon joined by Constable John Thane, who was sent at once to fetch a nearby doctor. Upon his arrival, shortly after 4 o'clock, Dr. Reese Llewellyn estimated that, quote, she had not been dead more than half an hour. In other words, Cross and Paul had likely found the woman mere minutes after she was killed. Furthermore, 3 officers had patrolled the vicinity just a few minutes prior. Constable Neal had last inspected Bucks Row at approximately 3:15. So too had Sergeant Henry Kirby, whereas Constable Thane had merely passed the end of the street, none of whom had seen nor heard anything amiss. Upon the body's removal to the mortuary, a shocking discovery was made.
Caramel and
Apart from 2 incisions in the throat, the woman had also been, quote, disemboweled. As the sun was rising on September,
hey, John.
a man named John Richardson was on his way to work. At 4:45, he made a quick stop at 29 Hanbury Street. He went through the entrance and out the back door by way of a cramped hallway. Richardson then sat down on the backyard steps before grabbing a knife to trim a vexing piece of leather from his boot. Once satisfied, he left the building and shut the front door behind him. About an hour later, a third-floor tenant of the same address, John Davis, plodded downstairs.
How many fucking Johns live here? Holy shit.
The front door was now wide open.
This is already the fourth
but the one
John.
In the back was closed. When Davis went to open it, he found the bloodied remains of a woman lying on her back just below the steps. Inspector Joseph Chandler was the first officer on the
Jesus fucking Christ!
inspection. He sent it once for a medic. Dr. George Phillips arrived at 6:30 and found the woman, quote, terribly mutilated. The throat had been, quote, dissevered deeply, whereas the abdomen had been, quote, entirely laid open. The intestines had been, quote, lifted out of the body and placed by the shoulder of the corpse.
God damn.
The body was then conveyed to the mortuary, while Inspector Chandler and Dr. Phillips conducted a sweep of the backyard.
But what does ace pilot John Richards think of this?
But just below the resting place of the
Or Prime Minister
they found a
John
small
Washington.
piece of cloth and 2 combs. The items had likely belonged to the victim, but it seemed to Dr. Phillips that they had been deliberately positioned and arranged by the killer. The post-mortem revealed that 2 brass rings had been forcefully removed from the victim's left hand. These rings were nowhere to be found. Portions of the victim's abdomen had also gone missing, including the womb. Dr. Phillips believed that, quote, the mode in which these portions were extracted showed some anatomical knowledge. This point was greatly expanded upon at the subsequent inquest. The injuries had been made by someone who had considerable anatomical skill and knowledge. There were no meaningless cuts. For instance, no mere slaughterer of animals could have carried out these operations. It must have been someone accustomed to the post-mortem room.
Thanks, Risa Bluthmore.
The victim was quickly identified as Annie Chapman. Chapman's date of birth is a bit uncertain, but she was roughly 47 at the time of her death. She had at least 7 children, but was tragically only survived by 2. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 35 Dorset Street. On the night of her death, Chapman had been denied accommodations as she lacked the funds to pay for a bed. She was escorted off the premises by the night watchman, who then saw her vanish into a nearby alleyway. What happened to Chapman over the next few hours, nobody knows. Her whereabouts during this time is a complete mystery. But unlike the 2 previous cases, a witness in the Chapman case might have caught a glimpse of the killer.
Oh!
At 5:30 on the morning of
Can
September
they draw them?
8th, a woman named Elizabeth Long spotted a man and a woman conversing outside 29 Hanbury Street. Long was positive that the woman she'd seen was Annie Chapman, but the man had stood with his back towards Long, so she never saw his face.
Useless.
Long did, however, manage to overhear a fragment of their conversation. The man had posed the question, "Will you?" To which the woman responded, "Yes."
Ah, wow, nice, he's in.
Now, a lasting point of contention in the Chapman case is the time of death. According to Dr. Phillips, when he arrived at 6:30, Chapman had been dead for, quote, at least 2 hours. That would place her death at around 4:30. But according to Long, she saw Chapman alive a full hour later. Then there's the testimony of John Richardson. Richardson was the son of one of the tenants in the building. At 4:45, he made a routine checkup on the door to the basement, which had previously suffered a break-in. When he found it secure, he sat down on the backyard steps to trim a piece of leather from his boot. Even though he sat mere centimeters from the murder site, Richardson did not see a body. He was adamant on this point.
Well, yeah, it would have been hard to miss.
To notice the deceased if she had been there.
It would have been really, really hard to
muddle
miss
the
that
timeline
somehow.
Even further, there's the testimony of Albert Kadosh. About 20 minutes past 5, Kadosh had gone through the backyard of 27 Hanbury Street when he heard voices coming from nearby. They were barely audible, however, and Kaddish had only made out the word no. A few minutes later, he heard something falling against the wooden fence, dividing the 2 yards.
Why wouldn't he check that out?
There's no one way to untangle this web of contradictions, but Dr. Phillips did concede the possibility that he'd miscalculated. That, quote, the coldness of the morning and the great loss of blood had skewed his opinion, which was largely based on the warmth of the body. So, presuming that Dr. Phillips did miscalculate, and the recollections of Long and Kaddish were off by a few minutes, that would place Chapman's death at around 5:30.
Is that super helpful information in this case, though? I feel like that isn't really going to help very much.
The dim light of dawn would have provided the tenants of 29 Hanbury Street an unobstructed view of the murder site, some of whom had even slept with their windows open. In spite of this, the killer managed to evade detection and even made time to arrange the victim's possessions.
Yeah, it's extremely lucky, I guess.
As the tally of victims gradually mounted,
the
public
human
grew
bear in Tier 1.
increasingly anxious.
Not the
They were
days.
not only frightened by the murders, but frustrated with the police and their perceived incompetence. Even across the pond were the efforts of the police fiercely criticized. The London police and detective force is probably the stupidest in the world.
What the fuck do you mean? Like, I can't even be mad at the detective force here. This guy fucking murdered a woman in the backyard of like an apartment complex where people were sleeping with their windows open and none of these idiots saw anything? More like London has the dumbest tenants in the world. Like, how do you miss that? And a guy even allegedly heard the body hit the fence and then didn't bother to check. It's absolutely not the police's problem that everyone there is fucking stupid. I don't blame them at all. They've done nothing wrong so far.
What these mocking quotes and illustrations failed to capture were the overwhelming odds stacked in favor of the perpetrator. The police were up against someone who seemingly
Man, this guy is...
Eagle, Deemschutz, and a few others promptly dispersed to find a policeman. While a growing crowd of bystanders waited for
no
the
moonlight. I guess without
arrive,
moonlight,
there
it's
was
possible.
no sign of the perpetrator.
I didn't think of no moonlight. Because it could have been like a really cloudy night or some shit.
Across the city, less than a kilometer to the west, an even more ghoulish discovery was about to be made. At 1:30 of the same morning, Constable Edward Watkins patrolled an open space known as Mitre Square. Watkins' beat would take him through the square about once every 13 minutes, and on this occasion, it was deserted. But in the time it took Watkins to complete another rotation, Mitre Square was turned into a crime scene. I next came in at 1:44. I turned to the right. I saw the body of a woman. Cicada and Dr. Frederick Brown soon converged upon the scene. They found terrible injuries inflicted upon the woman's face, throat, and abdomen. The intestines had been, quote, drawn out to a large extent and placed over the right shoulder. Among the many lacerations to the face, Dr. Brown noted that, quote, the lobe and auricle of the right ear was cut obliquely through. Based on their expert opinions, coupled with the testimony of Watkins, the woman had died within minutes of her body being found. Back in Berners,
maybe Jack the Ripper was a bunch of people. I'm sure that's a theory.
Conclusion. The woman in
like it was a
Buckles
cult.
Yard had died within minutes of her body being found. But unlike previous victims, she had only suffered injuries to the throat. There were no abdominal mutilations or anything else by which to connect the attack to the others. But the murder in Dutville's yard and the one in Mitre Square were separated by less than 1 kilometer and some 45 minutes. This allowed for a chilling possibility. It was suspected then, as it continues to be today, that when Diemschutz came clattering through the gateway, he unwittingly interrupted the murder. The killer may even have become trapped inside Dutville's yard because the gate on Berners Street was the only point of entry. Perhaps they saw an opportunity to escape when Diemschutz then rushed inside the club.
Damn you!
From there,
fucking
it would
Lewis.
take them less than 15 minutes to reach Mitre Square. Plenty of time to hunt for another victim. But it must be emphasized that this is pure speculation. There is no evidence to suggest the two murders were even connected.
Make the resub anonymous.
The woman in Dutville's yard was identified as 44-year-old Elizabeth Stride. Stride was a Swedish immigrant who'd lived in London for over 2 decades. Following the death of her husband, she had made a living through prostitution. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 32 Flower and Dean Street.
Make the resub gentle
On the
Lolly.
night of her death,
An
Stride had been
infinite rule.
seen by quite an abundance of witnesses.
Sama?
First, she was seen in the company of a, quote, respectably dressed man
Berg.
around 11 o'clock. About 1:45, Stride was seen talking to a man who was, quote, decently dressed and had the appearance of a clerk. Then, only a few minutes before the murder, Stride was seen in the company of a man by Constable William Smith. The man was carrying a small parcel wrapped in newspaper and was of, quote, respectable appearance.
It's
unclear whether
Julian,
these
and
descriptions
resub
are of the same person or if Stride accosted multiple clients as the night progressed. There were other witnesses, some less credible than others, but the one that really stood out from the rest was Israel Schwartz. About 1:45, Schwartz had been walking down Berners Street. As he came up on Dutville's yard, he witnessed a man throwing a woman to the ground in front of the entrance. The woman had, quote,
he didn't try and
screamed
help?
3 times, but not very loudly. Schwartz would later identify this woman as Elizabeth Stride. Schwartz did not try to intervene, but opted instead to simply cross the street. That's when he spied a second man on the opposite side who was lighting a pipe.
Alright, Israel.
The woman then appeared to address the second man by shouting the name Lipsky. The pipe smoker then proceeded to follow Schwartz before eventually breaking away. When taken at face value, this story appears to suggest that the killer had an accomplice by the name of Lipsky. This was indeed the interpretation of some government officials. But Inspector Frederick Abeline, one of the lead investigators on the case, had a very different interpretation. You see, the name Lipsky had gained notoriety in 1887 when a Jewish man by the name of Israel Lipsky was convicted of murder. Owing to the publicity of that case, the surname Lipsky had become an anti-Semitic slur. Abeline therefore deduced that the man who shouted Lipsky was directing an insult at Schwartz, who was described as having a, quote, strong Jewish appearance. The man with the pipe, meanwhile, may have been an innocent passerby who became frightened along with Schwartz. Whether Abeline's interpretation is correct,
so they didn't try and help at all? This man
nevertheless, Schwartz's account is compelling.
Straight up throws the woman down, getting ready to murder her, and they just walk by.
Elizabeth Stride was attacked.
It's fucking rough. Thanks, Risa, Morthar, Swifty, and Trust
A large crowd of spectators had assembled upon the
They could have at least started yelling, like, ah,
by their
ooh, ah, don't kill her.
Body. The post-mortem revealed that the killer had extracted a few organs, including the womb and left kidney. According to Dr. Brown, this extraction required, quote, a good deal of knowledge, which he likened to that of a butcher. By contrast, Dr. Cicada did not find any signs of, quote, great anatomical skill. The woman in Mitre Square
the theory is that he was a policeman.
They did not do so without leaving a trace.
I would
Shortly
believe
before
that.
3 o'clock,
but I do think it's multiple
piece
people.
of cloth was found near the end. 3 days before the murder of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, the Central News Agency of London received a letter in the post, the author of which claimed responsibility for the recent murders and to be planning for the, quote, next job. Then, in the aftermath of the 2 killings, the same agency received a blood-smeared postcard. It contained details about the atrocities, which the author described as a, quote, double event. On the off chance that the letters were genuine, the police decided to make them public. The hope was that someone would recognize the handwriting. Unfortunately,
that's such a weird idea.
Instead, it merely
I would
served to
never
advertise
recognize
the
handwriting
name with which the letters had been signed. Opinions on the letter's authenticity were divided back then and continue to be today.
I guess, yeah, maybe
Most
back
notably,
then.
The Dear Boss letter had promised to, quote, clip the lady's ears off and send them to the police. The police never received such a package, and neither of the 2 victims had had their ears removed. But you may recall that the right earlobe of Eddowes had been, quote, cut obliquely through. Was this a botched attempt by the killer to keep their promise? Or was it merely one of numerous lacerations with no connection to the letter?
He's a tier 1 elite type,
The contents of the letters notwithstanding, modern linguistic analysis does suggest that they were penned by the same hand. So, hoaxes or not, the authors were likely one and the same. However, the handwriting bore, quote, no resemblance at all to the message written above the torn patch of apron. Now, the publication of the letters inspired an onslaught of copycats. Agencies all over London were soon inundated with correspondence imitating the other two. But at least one of them might have been genuine, not because of the contents of the letter, but rather the contents of a box with which it was delivered. On October the 16th, a man named George Lusk received a small package in the post. Lusk was the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a small group of local tradesmen who sought to identify the killer. The package consisted of a letter and a cardboard box containing half a kidney. The doctors who examined the kidney all agreed that it was human, but whether it was the same left kidney removed from the body of Eddowes could not be determined. It could, for instance, have been an elaborate hoax by a medical student or someone with access to human organs.
It's crazy. Trolls existed all the way back then.
While insisted that the kidney did belong to the victim and that they had fried and eaten the other half. A popular theory at the time, and one that still is today, was that some of the letters had been fabricated by the press. According to Chief Inspector John Littlechild, the letters were, quote, a smart piece of journalistic work. Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson dismissed the letters as, quote, the creation of an enterprising London journalist. Meanwhile, Chief Constable Melville McNaughton thought he could discern the, quote, stained forefinger of the journalist. There are a few candidates for who this journalist might have been, but there is no solid evidence against any one of them. Whether it was a hoax by an enterprising journalist or the genuine prose of the Ripper, the letters did nonetheless receive widespread attention. They commanded space in virtually every newspaper and dominated much of the public discourse throughout October, a month which passed without a single atrocity bearing the signature marks of Jack the Ripper. Perhaps it was finally over. It is pretty certain that the monster has become frightened and has suspended his horrible work for the present, if not for good.
That's, I don't know about that gloating. Man's calling GG.
On the morning of November the 9th, a merchant and property owner named John McCarthy was going through his bookkeeping.
Hey, John.
McCarthy was the landlord of Miller's Court, and the tenants of room 13 had fallen behind on their rent. McCarthy sent at once for his assistant, Thomas Boyer, to collect the money at 11:15. After knocking twice without response, Boyer went around the corner to peer through a window.
Thanks, the resub.
But his view was obstructed by a coat or curtain, so Boyer had to reach through a broken window pane to pull it aside. That's when he saw the severely mutilated body of a woman lying upon a bed in the corner of the room. Miller's Court was soon crawling with police, but the door to room 13 was locked and had to be forced open with a pickaxe. What they found inside was truly the stuff of nightmares. The sight we saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. It looked more like the work of a devil than of a man. The whole scene is more than I can describe. I hope I may never see such a sight again. Dr. George Phillips described the body as, quote, cut all to pieces. Dr. Thomas Bond described the woman's face as, quote, hacked beyond recognition. The abdomen had been, quote, emptied of its viscera, while the throat had been, quote, severed all round, down to the bone. The body had been monstrously disfigured, with loose organs dispersed all around it. The room itself was sparsely furnished and offered little in the way of clues. 2 tables, 1 or 2 chairs, and a small cabinet.
But what about the security cameras?
Amongst the ashes of a fireplace, the police found patches of burned clothing. Had the killer tried to dispose of evidence, or had it merely been used for warmth and light? The victim was identified almost immediately. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly, and she was the tenant of 13 Miller's Court. But nearly everything about Kelly's life is shrouded in mystery. She was presumably of Welsh or Irish descent and in her mid-20s, making her the youngest victim by far.
Thanks to the gifts of
Given
Heaven
that
Sword.
no matching records of a Mary Jane Kelly
Yeah, it's
have been
everywhere,
found,
Neff.
it's probable that she was using a fake identity. In any case, Kelly had not been living alone. Up until a few days before the murder, she had cohabited with a man named Joseph Barnett. They had only separated on October the 30th because Barnett disapproved of Kelly's prostitution and the people with whom she associated. But they did see each other again. On the evening of November the 8th, Barnett paid Kelly a visit. Upon his arrival, he found Kelly in the company of a woman who was just about to leave. Unfortunately, there are conflicting accounts about who this woman was, when Barnett arrived, and how long he stayed. If we choose to believe Barnett, he arrived at some point between 7 and a quarter to 8 and left before 9 o'clock. Shortly before midnight, Kelly was spotted in the company of a man by her neighbor, Mary Ann Cox. When Cox passed the couple, they were about to enter Kelly's room. Cox bid Kelly goodnight, but she was, quote, very much intoxicated and barely able to respond. Once they had gone inside, Cox could hear Kelly singing. When Cox then left the court about an hour later, Kelly could still be heard singing. By 2 o'clock, Kelly had apparently ventured back outside, for she was spotted by a man named George Hutchinson. The two of them were supposedly well acquainted, and Kelly had asked if he could spare a few coins. But Hutchinson was broke, and Kelly was desperate for money, so they soon parted ways. Moments later, Hutchinson observed Kelly being accosted by a well-dressed man. The two of them had a seemingly jovial interaction and began walking north.
Chasing George.
Hutchinson found it suspicious that such a well-dressed man would seek the company of a woman like Kelly. As such, when the couple passed him by, he scrutinized the man's appearance. He was, for instance, carrying a pair of gloves in his right hand and a small parcel in his left. Hutchinson decided to shadow the couple as they proceeded to Miller's Court.
Wow,
Before they vanished up the court, the man handed Kelly a red handkerchief, and she had supposedly told him, "All right, my dear, come along. You will be comfortable." Hutchinson remained in the vicinity until 3 o'clock, but neither Kelly nor the man reappeared.
So he just sat there for an hour?
Cox returned home. In stark contrast to the loud singing upon her last departure, Cox was now struck by the complete absence of sound and light from Kelly's room. Finally, at approximately 4 o'clock, a tenant above and a woman across from Kelly's room heard cries of murder. The voice was that of a woman, and it appeared to emanate from nearby.
And they didn't do anything?
Meanwhile, other denizens of the court heard no screams at all. According to Dr. Bond, Kelly died between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Phillips placed the time of death a few hours later. But some witnesses were quite adamant that they had seen or even spoken to Kelly as late as 8 or 10 o'clock in the morning. Keep in mind that her body was discovered at a quarter to 11. These contradictions are difficult to reconcile, and the precise time of death eludes us to this day.
Well, how about the people that heard the cries of murder? Why? Can we ask them why they didn't do anything? And what about Hutchinson, who just sat there
Mary Jane
scoping it out?
Is typically regarded as the Ripper's final victim. Along with Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes, she is part of the canonical 5, the 5 victims most likely to have been slain by the same hand. Martha Tabram might have been a victim of Jack the Ripper, but opinions are divided. The same is true of at least a handful of other cases. Even the canonical 5 are not without controversy, so the total number of victims is a matter of debate. Presuming that Kelly was indeed the final victim, one has to wonder why. Why did the murders come to such a sudden end? Did the Ripper give in to fears of being caught? Were they imprisoned for a different crime? Perhaps they succumbed to an illness or committed suicide. Could they have migrated to another country? Perhaps they deliberately changed their modus operandi to confuse the police. The possibilities are virtually endless, which means there is no shortage of suspects.
Thanks to the bits Helio and give some plasmality. And thank you, Enigmata.
Following the murder of Mary Ann Nichols, a rumor began to circulate that someone called Leather Apron was in the habit of abusing prostitutes. The name quickly made its way into the press, and soon enough it became synonymous with the killer. In fact, Leather Apron was the predominant pseudonym before Jack the Ripper. But the man identified as Leather Apron was soon cleared of all suspicion. His real name was John Picer, and he was in a different part of London on the night when Nichols was attacked. This misguided manhunt is somewhat emblematic of the whole investigation. The police pursued even the most tenuous of leads due to a lack of evidence, and
they should have just hung out at prostitutes' places.
They interviewed thousands, investigated hundreds,
just post up like an officer at the main prostitute hotspots.
In the words of Inspector Frederick Abeline, "Theories. We were lost almost in theories. There were so many of them." In an effort to narrow down the search, the police used a primitive form of criminal profiling. The idea was to analyze the available evidence to try and gauge what sort of person had committed the crimes. This profile was prepared by Dr. Thomas Bond, and he described the Ripper as a strong, middle-aged man with an inoffensive appearance who dressed respectably. Bond's most controversial
Jesus, who was that one?
was
Peter
that the killer
Pan?
possessed, quote, "no scientific nor anatomical knowledge." This stood in direct opposition to the opinions of his peers, most of whom ascribed the Ripper with at least a basic understanding of anatomy. Based on the witness accounts, the Ripper was a man of average height with a medium to stout build in his late 20s to mid-30s. He wore dark clothes, including a hat of some sort, and had a mustache. But this sort of aggregation or tabulation of accounts can be quite deceptive. Not only are many details inconsistent, but they could be describing entirely different people. For all we know, none of the witnesses ever laid eyes on Jack the Ripper. So much is up for debate that one can build a case against almost any suspect. Some have even entertained the possibility that the Ripper was a woman or possibly a man disguised as a woman. While Jill or Jackie the Ripper is an interesting theory, it has failed to achieve any widespread support. What is rarely in dispute is that the Ripper was either a resident of or otherwise familiar with the East End. After all, he managed to narrowly evade capture on multiple occasions, which implies intimate knowledge of byways and patrol routes. He likely had some form of employment, as the murders were committed around weekends and public holidays, and he may have had some degree of anatomical knowledge.
I don't think he did.
With this unshakable profile in hand,
I think he's a
let's
fucking
take
idiot.
a closer look at a few suspects. The question is, where do we even begin? According to criminal profiler and FBI special agent John Douglas, the Ripper was not only a local, but was likely interviewed by the police. If Douglas is correct, the Ripper might be someone we've already met, either a witness or a person close to one of the victims. What about John Richardson, the witness in the Chapman case who sat down on the backyard steps to trim a piece of leather from his boot? Richardson was indeed suspected by the police, but they found, quote, "not a shred of evidence."
Thank you, Prime Hunter.
His mother also lived on the premises, so he had good reason to be there.
Thanks, you do sub, Steve.
What about George Hutchinson, the witness who followed Mary Jane Kelly after she was accosted by a well-dressed client? Hutchinson never clarified his motivation for shadowing the couple. He merely stated that he was surprised to see a man so well-dressed in the company of a woman like Kelly. Was he surprised because he was concerned? Was he jealous? Was it about money? After all, Hutchinson was broke, and the client appeared to be wealthy. Perhaps he waited outside the court with the intention of mugging this well-dressed client.
That's
true.
There are
many question marks surrounding Hutchinson. He has never been positively identified, so next to nothing is known about his life. This makes it very difficult to build a strong case against him. Hutchinson was interrogated by the police, but ultimately convinced Inspector Frederick Abeline that he was telling the truth. But not every witness attracted such attention from the police. Take, for instance, Charles Cross, the man who discovered the body of Marian Nichols.
Of course, there's so much slapping.
On the morning of
not
August the 31st, Charles Cross left his home on Dovton Street and headed for work. When he turned into Bucks Row, he happened upon the body of Marianne Nichols. Moments later, he was joined by Robert Paul, and events transpired as previously described. Despite his proximity to the crime, Cross appears to have escaped suspicion from both the press and the police. He was evidently seen as the innocent passerby that he appeared to be. But in recent years, that perception has been challenged. The argument is that Cross was in the act of committing the murder when he was interrupted by the approaching footsteps of Paul. Cross then concealed the murder weapon and portrayed himself as someone who just found the body. The injuries inflicted upon Nichols would be consistent with an interruption, as they were less severe than those of later victims. What's interesting about Cross is that he likely testified under a false name. He claimed to be employed as a carman, and his address was given as 22 Doveton Street. But surviving records show that in 1888, this address was occupied by a man named Charles Lechmere.
Maybe he forgot his last name.
As a carman, and on at least one occasion went by the name Charles Cross, as it was the surname of his stepfather. It is now widely believed that Charles Lechmere was the man who appeared at the inquest, and that he assumed the name of his stepfather when he testified. His motivation for doing so has been the source of much speculation. Was he trying to conceal his identity?
I'm convinced.
Or was it merely a force of habit? After all, contemporary examples of people doing the exact same thing are not difficult to find.
Executives will begin, Steve.
The most compelling evidence against Lechmere is that his morning commute between home and work roughly coincides with the time and place of the murders.
It's definitely this fucking guy.
Except for the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes.
Yeah, but they're not far.
Sunday, the only day when Lechmere would have been free from work. Not only that, but all the murders were committed around weekends and public holidays. Why would a man who supposedly timed the murders with his morning commute gravitate towards days of rest? In any case, Lechmere's mother lived a few blocks south of Berners Street, the neighborhoods around which is also where Lechmere spent his childhood. As such, it's speculated that Stride and Eddowes were killed after Lechmere paid a late-night visit to his mother. While he claimed to be employed at a delivery firm known as Pickford's, there are no surviving records of his employment. If he did work for Pickford's, there is a fair chance that he delivered meat and would thus have been exposed to slaughter and blood on a daily basis. Lechmere remained in East London until his death in 1920 at the age of 71. While there is no evidence of Lechmere ever being suspected by the police, it is difficult to believe that he was completely overlooked. Many case files have not survived, so any doubts investigators might have had could have long since disappeared. Now, a witness who definitely attracted attention was Joseph Barnett.
Yeah, but it was Charles Cross. I believe it was Charles Cross. In fact, I know it was. After hearing that, nothing.
investigation was overseen by numerous high-ranking officers within the Metropolitan Police. One of them was Assistant Commissioner Robert Anderson. Upon his retirement, Anderson repeatedly and unequivocally stated that Jack the Ripper had been identified. There was no doubt whatever as to the identity of the criminal. Without disclosing the name of the suspect, Anderson described him as a, quote, low-class Polish Jew who was, quote, safely caged in an asylum. He'd been identified by a witness who was described as, quote, the only person who ever had a good view of the murderer. This unnamed witness had supposedly refused to testify because the suspect was, quote, a fellow Jew. I am almost tempted to disclose the identity of the murderer, but no public benefit would result from such a course. While Anderson never revealed the name of the suspect, his colleagues were a bit more forthcoming. Chief Inspector Donald Swanson revealed that his surname was Kosminski.
Thank you, Donald.
Yet another high-ranking officer, Melville McNaughton, described Kosminski as a homicidal and misogynistic resident of Whitechapel. Surviving records show that an Aaron Kosminski was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in 1891. Aaron was indeed from Poland, he was Jewish, and had lived in Whitechapel. He suffered from auditory hallucinations and a paranoid fear of being fed by others. He was trained as a barber, but had, quote, not attempted any kind of work for years.
Thanks to Resub Hexmania.
It's unclear when his mental health began to decline, but upon being institutionalized, Aaron was deemed to be harmless. He was, quote, quiet and well-behaved, and, quote, apathetic as a rule. Only on rare occasions would he get, quote, excited and violent. However, before his confinement, Aaron had once threatened his sister with a knife. The case against him largely hinges upon the claims made by Anderson, Swanson, and McNaughton, especially the claim that an unnamed witness identified a suspect named Kosminski.
There had to be a witness at some point here.
That suspect
These murders were committed in front of fucking apartments.
With Aaron Kosminski. For instance, McNaughton stated that the suspect had been, quote, removed to a lunatic asylum about March 1889. Aaron was first confined in 1891. Swanson wrote that the suspect had been, quote, sent to the asylum and died shortly afterwards. Aaron was still alive at the time and spent nearly 3 decades in psychiatric care. As such, it is possible that the suspect Kosminski was someone other than Aaron Kosminski. It's also possible that these inconsistencies were mere lapses in memory. After all, these events were recounted years or even decades after the fact, and McNaughton even confessed to writing solely from memory.
Thanks for resub, Chad.
Regardless of the suspect's true identity, Anderson was the only one who seemed convinced of his guilt. McNaughton ultimately favored a different suspect and stated that, quote, many homicidal maniacs were suspected, but no shadow of proof could be thrown on any one. Inspector Edmund Reed was of the same opinion. Now we have Sir Robert Anderson saying that Jack the Ripper was a Jew. That I challenge him to prove. I challenge anyone to prove that there was a tittle of evidence against man, woman, or child. So when Anderson wrote that there was, quote, no doubt whatever as to the identity of the criminal, he merely expressed his personal opinion. There was in fact ample doubt and no consensus amongst the police. But in recent years, Aaron Kosminski has been resurrected as a prime suspect due to a controversial DNA analysis.
Oh.
Okay, so back in 1888, Acting Sergeant Amos Simpson
they found his old cum sock?
Stolen a blood-stained shawl from the crime scene of Catherine Eddowes. This shawl was then passed down from one generation to the next.
Why?
Before being submitted for DNA testing in 2011. DNA samples were extracted from the shawl and then compared against maternal descendants of Eddowes and Kosminski.
What?
In both cases, it was a match. If the subsequent news coverage is to be believed, the mystery has now been, quote, definitively solved. Aaron Kosminski was Jack the Ripper. But as you can imagine, it's never quite that simple.
That's fucking
First of
wild.
all, the provenance or chain of custody of the shawl is severely lacking. There is no evidence of a shawl being found at the crime scene, nor is there any evidence of Simpson ever being at the crime scene. Furthermore, a destitute woman like Eddowes is unlikely to have owned such an expensive item. Second of all, the type of DNA used to identify Eddowes and Kosminski was mitochondrial DNA, the powerhouse of the cell. And this type of DNA is passed down through the female line and is not unique to any one individual. Thousands can share the same mitochondrial DNA, which means it can't be used to pinpoint a specific person. In the words of a geneticist, based on mitochondrial DNA, one can only exclude a suspect. So to say that the mystery has been definitively solved is widely inaccurate. There's still plenty of room for doubt. So, to recap, a suspect named Kosminski was identified by an unknown witness. This was enough to convince at least one senior officer of his guilt. That suspect may have been Aaron Kosminski, a man who was largely non-violent but once threatened his sister with a knife. Aaron can neither be incriminated nor eliminated by the DNA evidence. He spent the rest of his life in psychiatric care and died in 1919 at the age of 53. Kosminski was not the only suspect advanced by a high-ranking officer. A completely different suspect who still falls into the same category is Francis Tumblety.
Damn, that guy looks cool. I still think it's Charles Cross. I really do.
The murder of Mary Jane Kelly.
All that made so much
An
sense
American
for Cross.
physician named Francis Tumblety was arrested in London. As you can probably tell from this photograph, Tumblety was quite an eccentric character. He was born in Ireland around 1833, but was raised in the United States. From an early age, Tumblety gained a reputation for being a medicaster or quack doctor. He engaged in all sorts of medically dubious practices and advertised himself as the Indian herb doctor. He promised to cure anything from dyspepsia and scurvy to cancer and blindness using nothing but medicinal herbs.
Man, some things never change. There's still people just like this.
He was either accused or convicted for crimes like theft and assault, attempt to induce a miscarriage, and manslaughter of a patient. He was even implicated in the assassination of US President Abraham Lincoln, but was ultimately cleared of suspicion. Now, in the early 1860s, Tumblety is alleged to have hosted a lavish dinner party.
What are you talking about? Did you even message the Miniature Journey?
And Tumblety
just message the support man. Why are you messaging Twitch mods?
Of women. Furthermore, he showcased a cabinet.
They weren't involved in it. Just message the support man.
A vast collection of jars filled with anatomical specimens, some of which were said to contain the wombs of, quote, every class of woman. In 1869, Tumblety ventured across the Atlantic and visited England for the first time. By his own admission, he roamed the streets of London until he became familiar with every part of it.
It's been weeks, no reply. I know that's wrong because the posters would have only got there about a week ago.
Had a few skirmishes with the police.
Just resend the email then.
After a few more voyages between the old world and the new, Tumblety found himself in London in the autumn of 1888. The purpose of his visit and whereabouts at the time of the murders are completely unknown. Tumblety never stayed in one place for long and made frequent use of false names. There is a story of a mysterious lodger leaving behind a blood-stained shirt near the murder site of Elizabeth Stride. This supposedly happened on the night of the murder, and some believe that this lodger was Francis Tumblety.
Nah, I think it's definitely Charles Cross.
There is no firm evidence of that, and the entire incident is fraught with uncertainty.
Oh sweet, well, thanks Chainsaw, glad you like that.
What we do know is that Tumblety was arrested in London on November the 7th. According to the press, as well as Tumblety himself, he was arrested on suspicion of being Jack the Ripper. 2 days later, Mary Jane Kelly was found brutally murdered, and it's unclear whether Tumblety was still in custody or had already been released on bail. Nevertheless, he was ultimately charged with 4 counts of gross indecency, which had nothing to do with the murders. But Tumblety had no intention of standing trial. Instead, he made his way across the English Channel, boarded a steamship under a false name, and fled back to America. He was pursued by detectives and kept under surveillance, but his offenses were, quote, not extraditable. As such, Tumblety remained in the United States and never returned to England.
That is suspicious.
Francis Tumblety was a misogynistic medicaster who was in London at the time of the murders. He even showcased a collection of wombs, and the Ripper did indeed extract the womb from 2 of his victims. I mean, he sounds like the perfect suspect. Perhaps a bit too perfect. There is no doubt that toThe was in London in 1888, but the claim that he was a misogynistic collector of human body parts is extremely dubious. It can be traced back to a single article from December of 1888 featuring an interview with a man named Charles Dunham. Dunham had a long history of spreading misinformation and has been described as a pathological liar, a forger, and a conman. He was even convicted of perjury. As such, there is every reason to believe that this story is a complete fabrication.
Yeah, I still was never convinced. I always thought it was Charles Cross.
Furthermore,
for the
toThe was
last 10
both
minutes.
older and taller than the men described by most witnesses. toThe was said to be, quote, an enormous man who liked to dress in flamboyant and militaristic outfits. It's difficult to imagine a tall, pompous American sneaking around the streets of Whitechapel virtually undetected. On the other hand, it's unclear which, if any, of the witness accounts can be trusted. Then there's the
Tier
matter
1
of the
Seth
rings.
Scott in the
You
Prime
may
Club
recall
Universe
that
of Kick
2
Ass.
brass rings were stolen from the body of Annie Chapman. It's suspected that the rings were taken by the Ripper to be kept as trophies. Now, upon his death in 1903, toThe left behind a quite impressive estate. But among his many valuable possessions were a pair of inexpensive imitation rings.
Oh shit.
Could they have been the same rings taken from the body of Chapman?
That's pretty interesting.
It's possible. It's also impossible to prove.
God damn it. I still think it's Charles
Chief
Cross.
Inspector John Littlechild regarded toThe as a, quote,
Thanks for
very
sub
likely
thirsty.
suspect. And it's not difficult to see why. If the many rumors about him are to be believed,
first I heard of that,
both
oily rain.
opportunity and motive to commit the murders.
Yeah, send an
But
email
there
to it,
lies the
Scander, and they'll
problem.
get it to you.
Much of what
But
we know
yeah,
about
it'll be there
toThe
pretty soon, I
is founded
imagine.
upon unsubstantiated rumors. toThe himself was an attention-seeking charlatan with no qualms about lies and deception. With a suspect like that, one can never be certain where the lies end and the truth begins.
I still think Charles Cross. Instead of his real name, which was Charles Lechmere. That was very... Thanks, Deasley. Yeah, we can do Consumed by the Apocalypse. I haven't seen this one yet, I don't think.
Of all the species to have ever lived, all but a tiny fraction have gone extinct. At some point in the future, the same
shit's
fate
wild, Wassy.
will befall humanity. It may take centuries, it might take eons, but extinction is unavoidable.
Not true.
The future is
with
fraught
CRISPR.
uncertainty, and the apocalypse.
Oh, is this going to be like Nibiru?
Nearly 800,000 years ago, an approximately 1 kilometer wide asteroid collided with Earth. The crater has yet to be located, but fragments from the impact
I've seen that
have been
feedback.
found scattered across the eastern hemisphere, an expansive strewn field
I'm
that
familiar with
covers
that
up
as
to
well, Sweaty.
30% of the planet's surface. Our distant ancestors were not only alive to witness this event, but managed to adapt and survive. Impacts of this magnitude occur roughly once every 500,000 to 2 million years. More devastating impacts, like the one that nearly wiped out the dinosaurs, are far less frequent.
Wow.
Possibly striking once every 100 million years.
So has that been completely confirmed that it was an
Whether a
asteroid that
collision
killed
of
the
this
dinosaurs?
magnitude is
I don't
survivable
keep up with dinosaur
is a
news.
matter of debate.
Yeah? Okay, cool.
The kinetic energy released upon impact would be equivalent to the simultaneous detonation of billions of atomic bombs.
No, I'm gonna say it's
Those
confirmed
who survived the initial blast
it's said in
would
this
be
video.
subjected to unrelenting earthquakes, firestorms, and tsunamis. A thick layer of smoke and dust would quickly envelop the globe and blot out the sun. An impact winter that could last for months or even years.
Yeah, and the dinosaurs were too
Darkness,
fucking stupid to
freezing
have
cold,
electricity.
and global famine
So they couldn't have
would throw
heaters.
the world into chaos. In spite of this, long-term survival is not inconceivable. Small pockets of humanity may take refuge underground and would at least be given a chance to rebuild civilization. But make no mistake, it would be a close call.
Maybe, but what if we made a giant protective layer around Earth?
The
Made out of
survivability
metal
of the impact
to bounce
also
it
depends
back.
on how much time we have to prepare. More than 90% of nearby asteroids and comets larger than 1 kilometer have already been detected. If one of them were on a collision course with Earth,
I think so, Shock.
we'd know for decades or even centuries in advance.
All good, pal.
But this was not always the case.
Any serious weed?
In 1983, a 9-kilometer wide comet was only spotted 2 weeks prior to its closest approach.
Oof.
That's 2 weeks of preparation had it been aiming for Earth. While things have significantly improved since 1983, space is impossibly vast. In 2019, an asteroid capable of leveling a city was detected a day before it flew 5 times closer to the Earth than the Moon.
Whoa! I never heard about that.
While the odds of an extinction
I wonder
of
what
population
city that would have
are
hit.
remote. It's not impossible. There is a class of objects known as Damocloids. Damocloids are typified by their highly eccentric orbits and low reflectivity, meaning they periodically pay us a visit and are extremely difficult to detect. We're currently tracking about 200, but there could
So
be
is this
hundreds
whole
more
video about how
tumbling
Earth
through
could
the solar
end?
system.
The multiple ways, so this one's
Damocloids
focusing
are,
on the
average,
asteroid.
16 kilometers.
Next one will probably be heat death.
If one of them were on a collision course with Earth, there might not be any warning.
I know, guns. I'm just pretty tired of RuneScape, man. I just don't have any goals.
When massive stars die, they explode. If a star went supernova within 30 light years of Earth, it would be cause for concern.
We should really just put jets on this fucking planet so we can move it around.
Fortunately, more than
just in
90% of the stars within this bubble have already been discovered, none of which are at risk of exploding anytime soon. But some supernovae can still pose a threat from thousands of light years away. It's a gamma-ray burst, produced by only the most violent explosions in the universe. Instead of a spherical blast, a gamma-ray burst will channel the explosion into two highly concentrated beams. More energy is released in a few seconds than the sun will radiate in its entire lifetime.
Whoa, what the fuck? That's pretty cool. It's the second most violent explosion though, second only to gamer rage. But still pretty impressive stats.
A nearby supernova or gamma-ray burst are poorly understood. We do know that the atmosphere would absorb much of the high-energy radiation, but this may also strip the Earth of its protective layer of ozone. If so, harmful levels of ultraviolet radiation from the sun would penetrate down to the surface. Certain chemical reactions may also darken the sky and induce global cooling, a cosmic winter of sorts. This could last for years and would be lethal to many plants and animals. In fact, a gamma-ray burst might be responsible for a mass extinction that killed roughly 70% of all marine species nearly 500 million years ago.
The late Ordovician.
Now, humanity could easily protect itself against ultraviolet sun rays, but living through a mass extinction would not be a pleasant experience. While some authors have painted a far bleaker image, with one hemisphere effectively sterilized by intense radiation, these findings have been contested in recent years. The latest research identifies ozone depletion as the primary threat. Nevertheless, a gamma-ray burst sniping the Earth from across the galaxy is extremely improbable. All of them have so far been extragalactic in origin, much too distant to pose a threat.
Fucking crazy that you can see shit across the galaxy, and it looks so lame.
None of them.
That was apparently more heat than the sun will ever generate, and it just looked like a small zit. Fucking nuts.
Apart from impact events and stellar explosions, the foreseeable future is free of cosmic threats. Other eventualities are either too improbable or won't happen for millions of years.
Thanks to Prime Pork.
Ample time for us to prepare, other calamities permitting.
I really enjoyed it, Jake. Thanks to the gift sub, only made this sub to Charlie. Imagine if humans didn't need to sleep. We could already have the technology required to just stop gamma bursts and supernovas and blow up asteroids.
74,000 years ago, a large volcano erupted in Southeast Asia. It is the most powerful volcanic eruption in human history.
Thanks to give sub Crumple. Yeah, no, Exerbia.
For up to 2 weeks, it spewed enormous quantities of ash and dust into the atmosphere, enough to block out the sun and potentially cool the planet. A volcanic winter. But there's great uncertainty about the effects of the eruption on both the climate and humanity. It ranges from severe
tier 1. Hey, makes it tier 1 Arcadum.
With the latest research supporting the latter. In either case, this is good news.
I didn't see any of those
supervolcanic eruptions pose little to no threat to human existence.
Thank you, man.
After
Appreciate
all,
the fucking generosity. Thank you, Arcadum.
Then so
Thanks
should
for the 10
we.
gift subs, man.
But
Thanks
there is something
Crunchy
even
and
more
Prime
destructive than supervolcanic eruptions. It's known
I
as
added
a
you on Discord, by the way, man.
basalt event.
I'm excited.
The largest one occurred 250 million years ago. An enormous outpouring of molten rock covered a region of Siberia the size of Europe.
Mount St. Helena is going to kill us all.
It just so happens to coincide.
Well, then do
with
something
the
about it.
deadliest
Pussy,
mass
stop it.
extinction in history. The good news is, flood basalt events are both rare and slow. Instead of a singular event, it's a series of eruptions taking place over thousands or even millions of years. As such, even if one began tomorrow, it might just be slow enough for us to adapt and survive.
Oh shit.
Throughout the centuries, pandemics have exacted a heavy toll on humankind. Among the worst was the Black Death. In less than a decade, it killed between 25 and 60% of the European population.
Holy shit, I didn't know it was that much.
Is unknown.
God damn.
Tens of millions. The Colombian exchange of diseases,
what was the cause of that?
And the Spanish flu claimed the lives of many millions more. The tragedy of these pandemics and epidemics notwithstanding, they
Rats was the Black Death?
To extinction. Okay. None of them killed more than a few % of the global population. For instance, the Spanish flu infected nearly 1/3 of humanity, yet the vast majority of cases did not result in death. A pathogen that not only infects but also kills every single member of a species is difficult to imagine. In fact, there are very few examples of infectious disease driving a species to extinction. With that being said, it's not inconceivable. For instance, pathogens that can pass between multiple species can be far deadlier than those limited to just one.
Yeah, I definitely didn't see that one, Depresso. That doesn't sound familiar.
Also known as the bird flu, is one such virus. So far, it's transmissible between humans and birds, but it can't sustainably spread among humans. However, laboratory experiments have shown that it may eventually acquire this ability through natural mutations.
Thanks for Prime Silver.
If so, it could easily become the worst pandemic in human history. But even this horrifying proposition does not come close to extinction. In a worst-case scenario, most of humanity would still survive.
Thanks to Prime Jackson. There's one discovered by Russia, H5N8.
Are complicated. It's a topic that's more relevant now than ever before, and cannot possibly be done justice in a few short minutes. But in the narrow context of human extinction, it seems unlikely for nature to stumble upon that perfect storm.
Thanks to resub, nice balls, bro.
Apart from volcanic eruptions and natural pandemics, the Earth has no inherent means of eradicating the human race.
Still interesting.
No other form of natural calamity is powerful enough to threaten our existence. As such, the most immediate threat to humanity
is humanity itself,
and continues to be humanity. While nature may struggle to devise a world-ending pandemic, it may not have to. Biotechnology is now advanced to a point where we can engineer pathogens in a laboratory. While this can greatly benefit our understanding and treatment of infectious diseases, it's not without risk. Accidental breaches of containment have happened on multiple occasions, and these experiments are not always conducted in the name of science.
Thanks to give sub, Eddie.
These engineered microbes are concerning because their destructive potential far exceeds that of their natural counterparts.
How many are there?
They can be deadlier, more transmissible, and less treatable. And the rapid pace of technological progress is constantly lowering the threshold for bioengineering.
His biggest concern was, he said it in so many words, that a small group of dedicated scientists could create an altered biological agent that could wipe out humanity as we know it.
Technically speaking, you can do almost anything with a microbe. The real question is, will you end up with a microbe that functionally will do the things that the concerned person at your hearing said, namely, essentially wipe out everyone from the face of the earth? Again, that's conceivable, although it's inconceivable, but it is, in fact, anything is possible. It would be very, very difficult to do that. Extraordinarily difficult, even in the best of hands, to not only do the engineering to get a microbe that has the characteristics, but be able to spread in a way in which it has virulence, transmissibility, and the ability to go in a sustained, transmissible way.
If technology reaches that point, wouldn't we be able to make a cure just as fast? I don't know, man. What the fuck are you asking me? I don't fucking work for the CDC. I have no idea. I would say probably not, though, if it breaks out unexpectedly. Okay. That's enough doomsday scenarios for now, I think.